When we think about freedom,
It's also security.
But is it really moving the human condition forward? No.
You have to distill a few practical low-lying fruits.
We need to start producing a lot more at home.
Holding leaders to account for implementation. In Jamaica, they had the Economic Program Oversight Committee.
When you use your spare savings to invest, you actually want to invest here because now you are contributing to the well-being of your own economy.
Many of the islands of the Caribbean are pegged to the US dollar, and you can't escape what the US is doing.
We lose control of monetary policy. We peg to a currency whose policies, apart from monetary, we may not support and agree with.
This Carnival band is an events company. It is a digital platform. It is a marketing company. It is also a manufacturing company and a distribution company, all wrapped up in one.
Live from the heart, yes, the very, very heart of Bridgetown, Barbados. Welcome back to the Upwind podcast. I'm your host, Lily Dash. Here on the show, we talk to leaders charting bold paths against resistance, leaders navigating the headwinds of our time and the Caribbean. Well, this region knows what it means to sail upwind in every way, literally to most every shore in the Eastern Caribbean, geopolitically, economically, socially. And yet we keep moving, we pivot, we tack, we adjust our sails because we know where we're headed matters. Today, I'm joined by two of the most courageous and visionary minds in Caribbean economic thought. Economist, strategist Marla Dukharan, and development economist and futurist Dr. Justin Ram. Together, we're diving deep into the structural, cultural, and psychological currents shaping our region, from sovereignty to crime, trade to tech, reparations to responsibility. Let us explore how we build a new future with heads, hearts, and hands. Welcome, Justin. Welcome, Marla. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I'm so grateful that we're together in the same room in Bridgetown.
We're blessed. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you, Lily. But before I start, let me just say thank you for having me here. And I think you are also a very courageous leader for doing this and for all the great work that you do for us in the Caribbean. And of course, I'm so happy to be here with my good friend Marla, who always brings me such great joy when I see her, and she lifts my spirit every time.
Same here. Same here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Having...
Well, to get to that question, like when you say CARICOM, are we speaking about the CARICOM Secretariat or just CARICOM in general?
Like so we have 9 million people in CARICOM. We've got 44 million people in the Caribbean combined. I feel like the Caribbean governments focus on CARICOM being those 9 million predominantly English speaking. Maybe that's not the right way. Maybe that is the right way. I don't know.
Yeah, well, if you're speaking about the people who are part of CARICOM, some of those are also French speaking and of course Dutch speaking as well, because we have Haiti and Suriname there as well, right?
Right, true.
Now, I think, and here's a topic that I think I'm hoping that we'll come back to. One of the issues that we have not delved enough into within our CARICOM sphere are actually our own stories, yes? Who we are as a people. And I think we have sufficient time since for most of those countries that are now independent. We do have some associate CARICOM countries that are not independent. But in the main, we have stories about our people as to, and what are their stories about where do we want our people to go now? What I find has been happening recently is that we tend to take stories from other places. And because we take those stories from other places, we then have policies that are not truly aligned with our people. And I think that that's a really important place for us to begin. We need a vision that comes out of us that is truly indigenous. And I think if we begin to do that, then hopefully our CARICOM leaders can learn. It's almost like learning from the bottom up. Learn from our people as to what we need, and then you have a vision from there. And in order for us to be flexible and to move with agility in this new world order, I think that's what we have to do. It's not just about thinking about what's happening globally and then we adjust to that. We have to understand what our people are experiencing, and then make those adjustments from there. It's a multifaceted approach to it. And I think leadership now has to be a lot more humble, understanding our people, and then trying to move us in that direction for what is actually good for our people, and not simply taking on policies that are not necessarily applicable for us. I think that's really, in recent weeks and months, my whole change in thinking, that we need to start thinking about what is right for our people and making the adjustments accordingly. Understanding that we operate in a whole global environment and with geopolitics, of course. But I think first and foremost, we have to think about what is good for our people. And in order to understand and to do that, we need to understand the stories of our people.
So this work we've been doing at the orphanages with these international organizations, they brought in a whole bunch of Apple products like cameras and computers and media production, and like the whole idea around the world, what they do with similar at-risk youth is like empower them to tell their own stories. Like this is a real strategy, and then to get those stories to the rest of the world. And then it comes back down to what you speak about, where you're creating something authentically. Like this is all created in Barbados and will be produced in Barbados and shipped outside, right? So
Yes.
that's with digital products. I mean, it's low lift. It doesn't take a lot of, the tools are available to us, telling those stories.
Yeah, no, it's I think that it's really critical because, and the reason I've come to this, a few weeks ago, I attended the Caribbean Film Festival, the first one of its kind. And when I went there, I saw movies, a movie from Guadeloupe. And the story of the youth in Guadeloupe, I was thinking, wow, I didn't know that this is what was happening in Guadeloupe. And so is anybody thinking about those stories, and are we developing the policies to really make an impact on their lives? Because when I look at that story, those people have been living like that for decades without much change. And I'm thinking, if we are really cognizant of where we want our region to go to, then we need to understand what sort of policies are going to be required, first of all, to help shift that mindset there. But also, if we want to get from A to B, I can't just simply take a policy that might work in Mississippi or perhaps even in Paris and apply it here, because our circumstances, our history, our socializations are totally different. And so I've just sort of come to a place now where I think the time has come for us to start putting the conditions of our people first, and to ensure that if we are going to move from point A to B, that our people need to be moving in a manner whereby their conditions are continuously improving. And that's how we get them to come along as well. Because we're going to try to be putting policies in place that are not moving our people in the right direction. And so we're always going to say, I thought I heard this story 2 years ago. Why are we still speaking about these things? When we never have the type of, I guess, progress that we expect. Because we say, oh, this policy sounded really great, but they're not really applicable because we have not really tweaked them for our own circumstances, or even come up with policies that are genuinely associated for our people.
Yeah. Marla, thank you. Speaking of stories, what's the economic story we should be telling ourselves in the Caribbean right now? What narrative would actually empower us?
That's a really good question, Lily. And in the whole theme of telling stories, I mean, the narratives are very important because it shapes how we think, right? And the lens through which we see our problems, but also our solutions. And I think that, and drawing on what Justin just said, whether we like to call it this or not, what we are actually talking about is decolonizing economics, meaning making in terms of our policy making, what we're doing consistent with our conditions, our history, our socioeconomic landscape, our political landscape, and not what is imported based on, the colonial influences we still have in our institutions, in our multilateral institutions, in our laws, so much of, and we don't even realize how much of our lives today are influenced by history and the institutional structures that remain coming out of colonization. So in the first place, we're talking about decolonizing economics and decolonizing policy making. So I think that, to me, is the most powerful approach we can take by deliberately and intentionally breaking those historical constructs that exist, not just in the institutions and the laws and the multilateral agencies that give us guidance on policy and so on, but also in our minds. And in decolonizing all of those things, we also have to think about, which, we've lamented so much in the Caribbean, the implementation deficit. Now, I just want to draw an example. In Trinidad, we had something called Vision 2020. And I don't know if you remember this, Justin, but this was the most widely consultative process on any socioeconomic development plan that our country ever saw in the Caribbean. And I personally know a lot of people, some of them are not even with us anymore because it was done so long ago. So many people were involved. So what Justin was talking about, understanding what your people want and the stories of your people and how that plays out into what they would like their future to look like. All of that, I think, when you read Vision 2020, a lot of that was captured in Vision 2020. And it was a beautiful plan. It really was. And I feel like every country needs to do this, where you consult with the people from the ground up, from schools, from health centers, from elderly care homes, retired public servants, retired teachers, as well as, currently employed teachers and so on, and get people involved in telling their stories and what they would like the change to look like. And the thing is, we had this beautiful document. Unfortunately, because it was created by one government, when that government was no longer in power, the other government just threw it out the window. So what, to me, it means is this has to be something that is apolitical. It has to be driven by, let's say, an NGO, a Chamber of Commerce, for example, or some association that is independent of government, might be supported by, because this is going to be a huge costly exercise. And it doesn't have to be with technology, but then we have the digital divide, so we could talk about another time. But the point is, it has to be widely consultative, and it's going to take time, but I feel like it's something every country should have. But then what takes us from having a Vision 2020 to having the social outcomes, which, by the way, as economists, all we really do care about is not the GDP growth rate, it's the social outcomes. It's the unemployment, it's the inequality, it's the health standards, it's the cost of living, it's the standard of living that we really care about, because that's all that really matters. The GDP growth rate don't matter. These kinds of debt to GDP, these statistics that we talk about are not really what we're trying to say matters. What matters is how it affects people. And I know that Justin has done a tremendous amount of work on implementation in the Turks and Caicos Island. And if you look at Jamaica's example of the EPOC, the Economic Program Oversight Committee, which is a body that sort of oversaw and held the government to account for achieving the plan that it said it's going to achieve, I feel like these mechanisms have proven to be successful in rolling out whatever plan the people have said they want, the government has collated, and as a people we've agreed we want, and then you hold the government to account for executing on this plan. You said something earlier, Lily, you spoke about reparations and responsibility, and I love that, because we like to talk about how we're victims, right? The climate crisis, we're the most at-risk region. Actually, we're not the most at-risk region in the world, but anyway, we do have risks. But we like to blame, our policymakers love to blame the external shocks. Actually, there are some countries in the Caribbean that are doing well despite the external shocks. What are they doing differently from the countries like mine, like ours, that isn't doing very well, right? And so you have to be able to hold your government to account for achieving the things that you've, as a people, articulated you want your future to look like. And I think those elements are the most important things. Having a plan that comes from the people, having an execution plan, and holding the government and the policymakers more broadly to account for executing and implementing the plan once you have it.
Justin, in one of your recent interviews with Marla, actually, you said that democracy may have been, you used the word democracy and the word hijacked in the same sentence.
Yeah.
And you tell me more. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, well, it's that's a really good follow-on question, because as Marla was speaking, it drew my mind to exactly that. And I want to endorse what Marla is saying, is that people need to actually have a say on where they want their country to go. And in fact, that's what I think when I say about democracy has been hijacked. And I'm going to say it here, hijacked by political parties. And so, given our history and what we have seen and what has not worked, I feel as if our democracy really needs to about giving our people the opportunity to really vote on where I want my country to go. So let's say we had some competing visions for the future. I think that we need our people to start voting on ideas rather than for political parties. Yes, and let me explain why I think that's important. I think we really want people to start thinking about where I want my country to be in 5, 10, 15, 50 years' time. And let's vote on that idea and have that in place. So if people have said, I am almost legislating that this is what we want our country to look like. Now, why do I say that political parties have hijacked us? Because if you think about it, if ever you go to a general election and you have your candidate to vote for, you have many candidates to vote for, have you been given a say as to who those candidates should be? You have not. You have not, because the primary process of choosing those candidates are really close to us, who are the real decision makers. So in fact, I will have one political party putting forward a candidate, another one putting forward a candidate, and it's really maybe 200 people who have decided who should do that. And I think because that primary process, the process of choosing candidates for us to vote for, is sort of like in a closed shop. That's why I say that our democracy has really been hijacked. And in many ways, Lily, when I hear about many of the policies that we're trying to do, like, for example, someone was saying recently, we need to ensure that our central banks are independent from politics. And I think sometimes we're dealing with symptoms. We're never really wanting to deal with the real issue, which is the politics, the political landscape. Why are we always trying to institutionalize and protect ourselves from political parties? That's the main issue. That's the main issue that we need to deal with, because that primary process has been closed to us and we have just come to accept it. We need to now break this open and say, okay, elections should really be about voting for vision and for ideas. And then let's open up this primary process and say, okay, all you need perhaps to become a candidate on that electoral registry, so we vote, get 50 signatures, and we put you on there, and then allow me to say, okay, I've voted for this plan and this vision, and then perhaps let me see who at best of my community out of all of these people can help us really implement that, instead of now saying to a political party, you decide on who I should be voting for.
Yeah.
Because that process, I think, has to change. And I think it is time for us, I'm not sure this is all the solution, but I think it's really important for us to understand that our democracy has been really hijacked through the current political process that we have. And it is time for us to realize that it's not working for us, and it is time to change. It's not only in the Caribbean. You can see it in many other democracies around the world, because that primary process is closed to most people. And by default, if I even go to the United States of America, when they vote on that the first Tuesday of November every 4 years, most people have no say as to who the candidate is that they are going to vote for. If you think about it, the Democratic Party puts forward a candidate, the Republican Party puts forward a candidate, and then you might sometimes have an independent. The majority of those people have not decided who those candidates are, but they just said, okay, you have to vote for them. And I think that's a big issue. The primary process needs to be changed and needs to be opened up. And we are small places, and I think we can do it a lot more easily than big places. And as we say, let these little keys be those that open large doors for us. We can show the world how democracy should really operate. Let's vote for ideas and open up the primary process and take back democracy for our people.
Yeah, I really like that. When you're voting, when the people are voting on ideas, there's like ownership in that idea, in that implementation of that idea. And especially in small states like ours, I think like we need all hands on deck. Like be involved in making things better, right?
Yes.
And then potentially if there's more ownership, there's more incentives. Because how many ideas just get lost and never implemented, like you said, implementation deficit. Marla, speaking about ownership, I'm wondering if like post independence, our communities had a bigger sense of ownership and like community and a sense of togetherness in terms of working towards a vision for the future. Has there been a sense that's been lost in the last like 30, 40 years where, you know, everybody kind of has to brat for themselves, and as a result of that, things are falling through the cracks?
You know, I really can't comment on whether there was more of a sense of ownership and accountability than there is now. I don't have a finger on that. But what I will say is, and you know, alongside Justin's point about, you know, basically localizing the political process more than it is now, I think that now you have this democratization of information and access to information and ideas and the ability to communicate that with the politicians. And so we have the tools now where that communication can be much more easily facilitated, whereas in the past you felt, very separate from your leadership. So for example, you know, if you look at the Arab Spring, it was started on social media, right? By a particular protester taking a particular action that just created a groundswell that then led to a lot of change and reform. So my point is, even if there was accountability or responsibility and a sense of ownership, then the fact is we have the tools available to us now to take a greater sense of ownership and responsibility and accountability and communicate to, for example, speak the truth to power. We can do that better now than our parents' generation could have in the 1960s and 70s, right? In the post-independence era. So I think that is important. And to what extent are we doing that? To what extent are we telling our stories, speaking the truth to power, and shifting and changing the narratives? And so each of us we have to be accountable for our own role in either things staying the way they are or in trying to push change. Yes. The second thing I want to say around that is I feel like, you know, we have this dynamic between politicians and the people where they make promises and we know that they write checks that, you know, they can't cash, right? But a lot of people are sort of captured and captivated by those narratives that, you know, I will make your life better. I will create jobs for you. I will, you know, educate your children. I will do these things. And the thing is, that's what we all want. That's what we all want as individuals. But how do people like Justin and myself and others who understand how these things work, how do you then tell them the truth that, listen, I cannot give you away money. It doesn't work like that. I can't print money and hand it to you. We all have to produce, right? And we have to produce something that we trade, whether domestically or internationally or both. And that, whether it's your labor or whether it's your creativity, your trading, that earns you income. And as a country, then we grow. I feel like there is, and I hate to go back all the time to the whole idea of decolonization, but we really have to decolonize our political process, but we also have to decolonize our education system. Unfortunately, we have created an electorate that I sometimes, you know, when and it's not something I'm saying to hurt anybody or to criticize, but sometimes I have witnessed where you can see that a political regime has created an illiterate electorate. And they've created an illiterate electorate so that they can fool the people and tell the people, I will do all of these wonderful things for you. So you vote for me, and I end up in power, and then I don't do those things. And then the next guy comes along and says, when are we going to realize that we, first of all, the education system needs to be reformed and we need to push for that. But we also need to take accountability, not just holding truth to power. We need to educate ourselves, right? We need to understand the way things really work. Like, can a politician really deliver on those things that he's saying that he can do for me? I need to understand what is the relationship between my labor, my creativity, my production, and the ability of the state and the ability of my country to provide infrastructure, to provide a secure environment, and all of these things. And so I feel like those are the things that we need to also understand that as a people, we also, as individuals, need to be accountable and responsible for.
Yeah. Okay, education. Thank you, Marla.
Mm-hmm.
You came out with a wonderful paper on May 3rd. And one of the most astounding aspects of it was education and how the system that we can't, and Marla talked about it in a different way just now, but the system really, in a way, incentivizes a lower education, like not obtaining your ultimate potential, because if you do that, there's no jobs here, right? So there's not enough jobs for.
Yes.
But now Marla's also saying that, like, the creature at large, right, being like the political process or, democracy, or in these parts of the world, an illiterate electorate, like, there's maybe more than one reason not to push the brush when it comes to education.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what we think of development should be. Mm-hmm. And when I had my discussion with Marla recently, we spoke about this, for us. And Marla said it, we sometimes we're focused on the headlines are usually what are our foreign exchange reserves, what are our GDP growth rates. As economists, we don't really care about those things, but those are the things that our policymakers focus on, and by extension, our people then focus on. But if you think about it, if you're only focused on foreign exchange reserves, you are really focused on what can I import, yes? And so my recent paper was really about our whole notion of economic development needs to change. And we need to have a different focus. And I think, and I'm just saying this, our focus needs to be on the human condition. Mm-hmm. And a better measure of the human condition, I think, should be, can I maximize the earning potential of every individual in this society? If you think about that, to do that, one, every individual needs to have good quality education. Two, we need to have a dynamic economy. And three, we need to have a very dynamic labor force, a labor market as well, so that everyone can now satisfy and earn and actually get to their full potential. Now, if you think about it, that's not what we have now at all. We have a situation where we don't have a dynamic economy. We're not producing that much. And so our metrics of development are as what we have now, which is not focused on the human condition at all. So I'm saying that at the headline, at the top, how we measure development has to change. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to focus on the human condition. And therefore, if you're focusing on that, then everyone needs to have good quality education, good quality healthcare to ensure that they can achieve their potential, rather than simply focusing on my GDP growth rate, which does not trickle down to those people, or on foreign exchange reserves, which really, in effect, you're saying to your people, you don't really care about them producing that much. So again, politicians, unfortunately for us, are operating within the current construct that we have, and are unfortunately not attempting to move us away from that. we as a people, and that's what I think Marla is saying here as well, we need to have our own vision as to where we want to go, and not simply depend on politicians to do that. We have to say where we want to go. And I think most people would agree that you want good quality education for all. So, for example, I was recently in Trinidad and they had the results of the secondary school entrance examination. That's what they call it. And the majority of kids didn't do well. You know, the mean scores in math and so forth have not been good.
You have some particular stats on that. Can you say what percentage passed math, what percentage?
So I think the percentage that passed. So I know like the mean score in math was in 50s.
Right.
Yes, that's the mean score. And then there is like creative writing, which again probably was in the 50s as well. And then I think there's another type of reading comprehension, which perhaps was even lower. Yes. Now, when I saw this, like, gosh, this is not good, because even children who then get through to their first choice school, maybe have only just managed to improve on that mean score slightly.
Yeah.
And so they themselves are not performing well. Something is fundamentally wrong with a system that encourages us, that really keeps us at a base, at an average level that is not high enough to allow us to really see the true potential. And I think the incentives are there to not do that because our economy just does not produce the type of jobs and because of the things that we think development should be. It's time to make that shift.
Could I just jump in there and add that I don't know if you saw that the girl who topped the country in the SCA exam, she said the first thing is we need to get rid of this exam. And this is out of the mouths of babes, you know, so to speak, right? This child is saying this exam is not the best thing for us. And we've been saying this since we were little, Justin, since I write common entrance. I don't want to tell you how long ago. And because what it does is it focuses on passing an exam as opposed to focusing on learning, you know, and we're not moving away from that. We've been doing this for 40 years or something like that, or 50 years or more. But I also wanted to add on the point of education. I did an interview some time ago when Grenada just elected the new Prime Minister, Mitchell. And he spoke about his vision as it relates to his development ideas for his country, but also around education. And he said, look, I am aware that our country probably won't be able to provide enough jobs for all the young people in Grenada graduating and getting an education. But guess what? I'm going to make sure they get educated anyway, and they get educated for jobs internationally. Because even if they leave, and by the way, Grenada is one of those few countries on earth that has a larger external diaspora population than domestic population. Guyana is also one. Ireland is also one. You know, what he's saying is that even if they have to leave to go out there and get a job, at least they are fulfilling their potential. At least they might be able to send money back home. They might be able to come and be nation builders at some point in time. So he is taking a very unselfish approach in educating his people, irrespective of the availability of jobs in his country. And how many leaders do you hear taking that kind of approach? And the other thing he said was, I also want to create the environment where my own people, as well as people internationally, would want to come and live and work remotely from Grenada, from wherever they are. And at some level, they will add to my economy, but they also add to theirs. And so, and that's what I think is needed as well now. We have entered an era of intense protectionism, nationalism, closing off of countries from everybody else on the outside. And you used the word very early in this podcast, collaboration, Lily. That's what we need more of. And even in the CARICOM sphere, I mean, lately there's discussions around moving towards the free movement of labor in certain countries in the Caribbean. And I think that when you think about collaboration, it is so, you know, different from where we're at now from a geopolitical standpoint, but it is what we need. When Singapore became independent, it was the same time that we in the English-speaking Caribbean became independent. And Lee Kuan Yew then went to all different countries to see what worked in their countries, what are their, so that he could learn from other countries. And of the 5 principles on which Singapore was built, collaboration is one, and learning from other countries is another one. And look at where Singapore is. They had the same GDP per capita that we did. And look at where Singapore is now. They had no natural resources, you know, and look at where they are now and where we are. By the way, they didn't have democracy. They had a benevolent dictator who wanted to lift his people out of poverty. And he did. And look at where they are. So where did democracy really get us as well? So there's a lot to unpack in that, but we need to look at how other countries started out where we, including Singapore, started out where we did, and look at where they are and how come we didn't get there. And a lot of it has to do with leadership or lack thereof.
Collaboration, like it's game theory. It's what Bitcoin is based on. Like collaboration is greater than snitch. That's what keeps the network going. That's what keeps the network from being hacked. Like it's far more beneficial to collaborate than to snitch, to not be collaborative, like ultimately for everybody. Do you ever think, is it possible that our version of sovereignty is actually costing us our sovereignty? Like if we look across the Caribbean, right, we go back to central banks. We all have our own central bank. We all have our own Ministry of Agriculture. We all have our own Financial Services Commission, many of them not running optimally, right? So the cost is great, right? Like when we look at the greatest tech companies in the world, there's a reason why there's not the greatest social media company of the world that is also the, you know, a Barbadian company or an English company or a, you know, this global scale. Economies of scale really matter, especially as we move into this tech world where cybersecurity matters. Is it possible? You want to be able to offer world-class service, and when we have these super tiny populations all doing the same thing, and then I mentioned it as like the well-oiled machine. Like if we think about instead of all these tiny machines that are not working optimally, one machine that's well-oiled, that's working. I'm not saying that you all become one, but certainly we could collaborate some of our services so that we could have a hope of having a world-class. It is possible. I think because we're so small, I think economies of scale are critical for us. But I think we also, as economists, we speak about economies of scale, and you know, you get to a point where if you have the mass where your markets can be big enough and you're able to do things a lot more efficiently. However, that is where I have to say, however, okay.
I think recently we've been seeing a sort of a pushback against sort of coming together. You saw it, for example, with Brexit. You see it, for example, in other democracies where people believe that if you have this amalgamation and it's not working for me at the local level, then I'm going to push back against it. So I'm saying, I think we have to be mindful that we want to move in that direction, to do things collaboratively, but at the same time ensure that it works at the local level for our people. Yeah. Because I think what happens is that when you centralize too much, you sort of forget the periphery and you forget the local communities, and then you get that pushback. You have to ensure that if you're going to have, let's say we were to have more federal provision of services in the Caribbean, let's say. Mm-hmm. You have to ensure that when you centralize that you maintain the contact with your very local communities to ensure that you are actually delivering what those communities want. So you have to, you can't be too far removed. So let's say, for example, if we go back to that idea of the federation that we had, when was it? 1960s.
Yeah. And our Prime Minister famously said...
which is, I don't want to hear those words, but I'm so sorry. It should have been 9. It should have been 9. It should have been 9. That math, yeah.
Funny arithmetic.
Funny arithmetic. But let's say we went and we got there and we had that federation in place. I think what's going to be important is although you centralize power, that centralized power has to have nodes that is in contact with your local communities to ensure, again, here's where the stories are important, to ensure that our people are being given the opportunities that they deserve. Because if they feel that that centralization is only benefiting a certain number of people, you're going to have that pushback.
Yeah.
So again, I say, yes, we want to move in that direction, but ensure that we maintain the contact. And part of that contact is ensure that those stories are being told, and so that policies really, the benefits of those policies always trickle back down to those people. Maybe that's not the right word to use, trickle down. I shouldn't use that word or those words, but ensure that those people are also benefiting in a real sustainable and in an equitable way.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the civil service and the cost of the civil service, and civil service costs X and education costs Y and healthcare costs Y, like certainly you would think that if we pooled our resources in that regard, that there'd be more on the ground for health on the ground in Barbados and more on the ground for education on the ground, if it wasn't soaked up so much by running our own Financial Services Commission and running our own Ministry of Agriculture and
I agree. I think we would save a lot and do a lot more. I'm just saying that we have to ensure that each of these places have their own stories, and we have to ensure that as we centralize that let's say that FSC is based in Barbados, that the regulators who are based in Barbados have to also be aware as to what's going on in Siparia in Trinidad, or let's say in Ocho Rios in Jamaica, to ensure that those centralized policies are really benefiting everyone, no matter where they are.
Right.
And it has to be cognizant of that, because what tends to happen is that we might just have a one-size-fits-all policy that might not benefit all, and then what happens is that you then get that huge pushback as to what we've been seeing recently with respect to some of our geopolitics. And so we have the lessons that we can learn from. Mm-hmm. We can go and do what is right, but also ensure that we're putting the mitigants in place to ensure that we don't get some of the negatives that they have recently experienced as well.
I think if you even think about the idea of sovereignty, what is it? I mean, it's an idea, but it's not a goal in and of itself. When we speak of sovereignty, what we really speak about is freedom, right? And I love to talk about development as freedom according to Amartya Sen, which is, we talked earlier about what is our idea of development. His idea of development is freedom. And the process of development is removing the unfreedoms that exist, right? When you think about how life was when we were children versus life now, are we more free now or were we more free then? I would say we were more free then, right? And so even though we are sovereign, our freedoms have been eroded. But again, I go back to the institutional structures that we've inherited that make us unfree, right? For example, our heavy import dependence, which Justin, you lament constantly and you wrote about recently based on the whole idea of competitive advantage. When we have large hotel chains coming to the Caribbean, do they prioritize local sourcing of agriculture products, of produce and alcohol and beverages and so on? Or do they just replicate a model that they have in Mexico, that they have in Spain, and they want to come and replicate in the Caribbean of importing from? And again, that is not sovereignty. What they're doing is they're, using economies of scale to replicate their model. And our politicians and policymakers are giving them concessions to come in here and replicate a model that imports everything that they need to give the tourists. And what that means is the tourists come here for sun, sea, and sand and our beautiful natural environment. But it really, as an industry, I think tourism really does not add value in most countries the way it should. And some countries, yes, where there's high local content, like Dominica, I think, for example, maybe to a certain extent Jamaica. But here in Barbados, I am not convinced that the industry adds value from a foreign exchange standpoint, fiscal standpoint, that we think it does, or at least we thought it should when we embarked on this journey. And I think all of that is wrapped up in the whole idea of sovereignty. when we make decisions on what industries, what foreign direct investors we invite to do whatever projects here, are they taking away freedom from us or are they giving us freedom? And I think that it's very important when you think about sovereignty to think about its relationship to freedom or unfreedom.
Yeah. And when we think about freedom, naturally, any individual would say freedom is capital, it's money to be able to do the things that are in your best interest for your own.
It's also security.
And it's security.
It's security,
and
yeah.
freedom and security also, you know, what's good as freedom if you're not secure either?
Exactly.
I think if I just add on to that, it comes back to what we're measuring development as.
Exactly.
Because if we're just concerned with a GDP growth rate or foreign exchange reserves, then we'll continue doing as we have been. Well, I'll invite whoever wants to come in. I'll give them the concessions. During construction, my GDP goes up. That looks good. Okay, people start coming in to visit those hotels. Yeah, the foreign exchange reserves go up a bit. We're happy. But is it really moving the human condition forward? No. And I think that's why we have to make that fundamental shift. Coming back to what Marla is saying about decolonization, about thinking about our own people and moving our condition forward in a way that is really beneficial to everyone, no matter where they are. Where we are here in Bridgetown in Barbados, as I come back to Ocho Rios or wherever our people might be, what is it going to actually move their condition forward? Is it this model of development? No, it isn't. And I think that's where we have to think about what we measure and how we think about development. That has to change.
Absolutely.
I love what Marla is saying about freedom. Is this really making our people freer? Absolutely not.
Okay, so I want to zoom in there. Like, we talk about the current model, right? But I would argue that most people don't even understand or know what the current model might be, right? And then how do you get to a new model, right? I mean, we spoke about a lot of things, but what's the lowest hanging fruit? I think one of the things is, like, where can you start gaining momentum and traction first, where you can start to see a meaningful difference first that can then push the boat forward, you know, in
a practical
in
sense.
a practical way that will then be sustainable, which will encourage the boat to keep sailing forward, you know, versus we have these ideas and then we try for a while and then we totally, you know, like I remember as a child, there's a song that came on CBC every night. It's like, I don't want no 50-50 brand, I want 100% Bajan. It was like on TV every night around the news, and now you don't hear that anymore at all, right? So, like, obviously, and now we're speaking about it again. We're here speaking about it again. So what do you think what's the first thing we could do?
But let me just say a little something on the current model, because I think people need to understand that. Yes, so it's coming back to the whole notion of education and why majority of the children leaving school don't have a good quality education, because we just not have enough jobs for them. Yes, how do you ensure that people are prepared for good jobs? Then you'd want to provide them with good education. But you don't have the jobs, so therefore there's not much incentive for governments to want to do that, because I educate people. Not many of our leaders are thinking like Prime Minister Mitchell in Grenada and saying, well, I'm going to give you a good education even if you have to leave. Just thinking, you can't get a good job here, so I'm not going to give everybody a good education. That's a real important notion, because if you think about it, if the majority of our people can't get good jobs, and that comes from a place because we're not producing enough. And when I say producing enough, not necessarily that we have to produce at 100%, you know, but we can add some value, right? We can add some value to things so that our people can then earn a better wage. But if you think about it, most of our people aren't in good jobs. They're not earning good wages. What then has to happen? Government then has to subsidize. And so our budgets, large transfers and subsidies are very high, leading to deficits, leading to debt. So what do we always have to speak about as economists? Okay, and we say, oh, we have large deficits, we have large debt, we're not growing enough. what's it? We might do some things to try to make a change. It might improve for 10 years. But if fundamentally our economic system isn't changing, then we're always going to be back here in 10 years' time again. And so I think that that's really important for our people to understand, that we need to start producing a lot more at home. And that means not necessarily 100% production, because we're never going to be able to produce everything. But we have to move from a situation where at least everything that we consume is now made up of 70% imports. That is unsustainable. And that means that we're not giving our people good jobs. It therefore means that we will constantly have these deficits because our governments think that they have to now support people with their households because they don't have good jobs. We need to turn this economic model on its head. And I think I love what Marla is saying. How do we give our people freedom? What is the real notion? You want to ensure that everyone can take care of themselves and their households. And I think that's where we have to now focus our economic system on. And it's going to take us maybe another podcast to talk about what type of industries that is. But I think we have to begin thinking of turning it on its head and moving in that direction.
I think though, Justin, I mean, yes, we can probably talk till next week about this, right? But you're right, Lily, you have to be able to distill a few practical low-lying fruits. Otherwise, to quote one of our former prime ministers, Justin, otherwise this is just an exercise in intellectual masturbation, right? And let's move away from that. I think going back to what I said earlier, and again, Justin has done a lot of work on this as well, holding leaders to account for implementation. Even if we don't have the whole big grand vision that the people have given. Let's say a government has announced, I'm going to reduce inflation and I'm going to reduce unemployment and I'm going to grow the economy. Let's say they say that in a budget speech. What mechanism is there for performance management? What mechanism do we have where the people say, actually, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z, and you have, brother man, done none of them. And therefore, what then is the next step? We don't have a mechanism like that. However, and again, I reiterate, in Jamaica, they had the Economic Program Oversight Committee that over 10 or 12 years since 2011 or so, is exactly what that is. The chairman of the EPOC used to come on a quarterly basis. This is Keith Duncan, who chairs JMMB Bank. Mm-hmm. On a quarterly basis, on the corner rum shop, and says, well, the government said they're going to bring down inflation. This is actually where the inflation rate is now versus where it was then. So they've achieved that. However, they said they were also going to do this and that didn't happen. And so here's what's going to change going forward. And it did a couple things. One, it helped people understand what's happening in their economy. So it's a bit of education. It drove a culture of accountability from the grassroots up, where people felt empowered and they understand that, hang on a second, these people sitting in Parliament making decisions are actually accountable to me. I put them there. And therefore, I have power to hold them to account for what they say they're going to do. And so I feel like that's one thing, Lily, each country in the Caribbean needs to have. And this committee, this Economic Program Oversight Committee, first of all, in Jamaica, costs nearly nothing because it's voluntary. It's people from the opposition, some people from government, people from civil society, people from academia, people from like the Chamber of Commerce and so on that are on this committee that collectively holds the government to account on a quarterly basis, right? What's stopping all of us from having an EPOC? Why don't the people decide we want an EPOC? Guess what? In Cayman, they did that. The Chamber of Commerce decided they're going to have something like an EPOC. They call it a governance scorecard, where they're going to tabulate all the goals that the government articulates in its strategic policy statement, in its budget statement, and so on. And they're going to, on a quarterly basis, in conjunction with the government who's going to feed them the information on what they've done or haven't done, they're going to hold the government to account publicly, transparently, openly, on social media, on YouTube, on Facebook, on these platforms to say, well, the government said they were going to do these things. This is their report card. Now, think about it as when we were kids, we knew we had to try to perform because when that report card reached home, as we say in Trinidad, crapo, smoke your pipe.
Yes.
If that report card had numbers in there or letters in there that, the parents were not going to be. It's the same thing. That culture of accountability is very important in driving performance. And Justin spoke about producing. We have to recognize that unless we are held accountable for producing and unless the government is held accountable for implementation, it's not going to happen. So I think that's one important, powerful thing that costs nearly nothing, that every country can do, that Jamaica has proven it works. The second thing is, as Justin was saying, what are we measuring? In Bhutan, they have the Gross National Happiness Index, which measures 8 metrics, which includes governance, which includes well-being. And why can't we measure something other than GDP? We can decide, just like Bhutan did. It's a tiny, relatively isolated, relatively poor in terms of GDP per capita country in the middle of the Himalayas. They decided they're going to do this. And then the UN actually endorsed it, right? How come we can't decide on a measure that's relevant to us? Again, I cite Cayman because I do a lot of work there, but Cayman came up with a well-being index. And they've, done surveys like you do surveys for that the statistical agency will do surveys. They go out and they did this survey on this well-being index that has various measures around things like having enough to eat, healthy, so social outcomes basically. And they created their first ever well-being index about a year or year and a half ago, which I really congratulate them on. And if you measure this index every 2 to 3 years, you can see directionally whether you're going in the right direction or not. So that's 2 very powerful things that the Cayman Islands is doing. One, holding the government to account for what the government says it's going to do. Forget what the people say for now. We still want to move in that direction. But in the short term, the government has articulated they're going to do these things. Who's holding them to account? They've decided they're going to hold them to account. And they created the well-being index that they're measuring to see where are their people in terms of their perception of their own well-being. And we measure it over time so we see directionally where we're heading. I think those are 2 things. And you can construct your own well-being index. It doesn't have to, they did their own thing. We can each decide what are the things we want to measure. And I think those are 2 very powerful things that ensures accountability for implementation and measures the outcomes. And what gets measured gets managed, right? And I think these are 2 important things that countries can do, not just in the Caribbean, but globally.
Thank you. Really good. Okay, so I'm going to just switch over to finance. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I haven't brought this up before, but it's just, I've been thinking, right? Like it took, and the US, and we're all kind of tied to the US economy. Barbados pegged to the US dollar. Many of the islands of the Caribbean are pegged to the US dollar, and you can't escape what the US is doing with their monetary policy. So in the first 230 years, they printed like $22 trillion. In the first 230 years, they printed $22 trillion. In the last 5 years, they printed $14 trillion. Right?
Right.
So we're seeing global asset prices double, triple, like gold has doubled, more than doubled in the last 5 years. Like we're seeing the S&P is up, also double. Like you're seeing astronomical prices in the market for these limited assets where all of this money is flowing into. Yet, and we're importing the inflation of that, like our cheese and our everything is more expensive. The feed to, we import 70%, right, which is a big problem. But our asset prices, like I can't tell you that this piece of land where we are right now has changed too much in the last, about 10 years, right? I can't say that our asset prices are going. So we're importing all of these expenses enormously, and the dollar is worth less and less and less each year. And so we're really in a difficult, maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. I know
You go or I go?
Yeah, well, you want to? You can go. Yes.
I think that's a symptom of the underlying problem. I don't think that that's a cause of our problems. I mean, certainly Barbados and Bahamas are the only two countries in the Caribbean that have formal foreign exchange controls. Trinidad has de facto controls. But the rest of the Caribbean, they don't have foreign exchange controls. And the thing is, you can in those countries access the foreign exchange to invest externally. Why would you want to invest externally if there are opportunities to invest domestically? And it goes back. So that's why I'm saying it's a symptom and not a cause. If what Justin was saying obtained, if we were producing more, to produce more, you require investment to produce. You have to create, the machines, or even like in your case, Justin, the carnival band. You have to invest in the productive process of the costumes and whatever else. And maybe you can talk about that and about why is it that we don't want to invest domestically in producing, but we want to invest more internationally. Well, because the structures in place incentivize taking money outside, holding hard currency instead of local currency. And all of these structures is what I'm saying have to be broken. Whether it's dollarization, I know you and I were supposed to talk a long time about your views on dollarization, which I actually don't agree with. But but I think that that's a big part of the discussion, that those structures that exist that incentivize holding hard currency and taking money out as opposed to investing domestically.
Okay, but certainly, guys, there are we talk about economies of scale, right? We can, of course, it's very important to invest here, but the types of returns that are available outside, which we have seen, right? We're not talking about just doubling in the last 5 years, but we've seen returns from 5,000x, 1,000x, just returns that are enormous because of the way that the scales,
the way the system works,
the balance is changing in the world, right? And it's difficult to be exposed to those opportunities with the system that we have now. But coming back to dollarization, guys, why do you guys disagree on?
Before we go to dollarization, to your point, do you know that the Jamaica Stock Exchange was the best performing stock exchange globally a few years ago? And the point I want to make with that is at that time in Jamaica, they had done significant reforms in terms of ease of doing business, cost of doing business, independence of their central bank, how their foreign exchange regime works, how their labor market works. And that created much more impetus to produce in Jamaica. And that's why their stock, it had to do with currency movement too, but it had to do with how the Jamaican economy was performing. So my point remains that even without dollarization, before we get to dollarization, even without dollarization, you can still have the best performing stock market in the world if you get the fundamentals right and if you're actually producing.
And let me say, and I will come back to dollarization, which my thinking has changed on that as well now. But just to say, now, when you invest in a particular economy, what are you actually investing in? You're actually now investing in the productive capacity of that economy and therefore creating jobs there as well. Right. Okay? So I want us to be very careful about wanting to have the opportunities for our people to invest overseas, which I think, yes, you should have some of those opportunities. But at the same time, you have to think about when you're using your savings, and if you're going to use your savings to invest in a foreign country, then you're really investing in that country, as it were, and in productive capacity and employment there. Right. What we have to focus on, and it comes back to everything that we've been discussing on this podcast already, is what's really important for us here. How do we ensure that the human condition improves? And so part of that narrative and part of the solution there is to ensure that our productive capacity is expanding here, that our investment climate is also quite good here, so that when you use your spare savings to invest, you actually want to invest here because it might not give you the return that, for example, the New York Stock Exchange might give you, but it can still give you a very substantial return. But the reason you want to do that is because now you are contributing to the well-being of your own economy, the productive capacity of your economy, and of course the people who live here.
Yeah.
It's about coming back to this whole mindset of, and I think Marla has said it here many times today, the decolonization of our mindset. You want to ensure that your place is good first, I think.
Right.
And then after that, you will get to a point where your income is okay. Well, my people are good, then I might want to allow more investments elsewhere. But I think here is where a fundamental issue has to be considered. We're small. We come back to this area, this notion of economies of scale. This is where the regional integration and this whole discussion around federal really is important. Because look, we can do great tourism here in Barbados, but I certainly understand the soil conditions in Barbados do not lend us to doing great agriculture here at the scale that we need. We might then be able to do that agriculture well in Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad, Belize. But in order for everyone in the Caribbean to benefit from those feedback loops from tourism, I should allow a Barbadian who's interested in agriculture to go and do agriculture in Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, Jamaica, Belize, where it makes more sense. And those people who live in those countries who might really be interested in a great tourism, they can come to Barbados. Look, I think this is where we need our leaders to be visionaries and move with alacrity to actually now put those systems in place to ensure that we have the regional integration, which first and foremost has to be the free movement of people. That, I think, can move the needle significantly for us as a people. We start thinking about ourselves as one people and start ensuring that economically we can benefit from the multitude of assets and facets that we have here in this Caribbean region. Yes.
Yeah, like that well-oiled machine.
It's okay, a means to an end maybe, but does that bring us closer to freedom? I don't think so, because then, like you said earlier, we lose control of monetary policy. We peg to a currency whose policies, apart from monetary, we may not support and agree with. And that to me removes fundamental freedoms for us. And I actually think that having your own currency gives you levers from a policy perspective and economic management levers that you can pull, that you give up and you sacrifice when you're dollarized. And just for that, just without getting into the technicalities, the one thing that dollarization does pretty well is that it ensures that as a country you have to earn the foreign exchange that you want to spend, or you borrow it, which is what most of us do. But you can't just do that into infinity, right? And so it forces you to produce a lot more and earn a lot more foreign exchange so that you can get by and just pay your people their salaries. You can't print it. You can't print US dollars the way you can print. Right now you have Trinidad, printing, So, yeah, so that's the one benefit I would say of dollarization. But I think that it removes too many of our policy levers and freedoms for me to think it's a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I used to be a huge proponent for dollarization. And what I discovered is that I was really a proponent for that because I had bought into the current economic model, which I saw, okay, dollarization really facilitates the current economic model. But I've now changed my thinking on that significantly, where, as you now know, I think we need to fundamentally switch our economic model. And so, therefore, I'm not going to advocate for dollarization. What I do think we need, while we need our local currencies now, but I want to say that I don't like the idea of having the local currencies pegged to the US dollar.
One currency only, yeah.
One currency only, or simply have a price that has been there for, or will be there for infinity. I think
agree.
that we need to ensure that that exchange rate is moving in accordance to ensure that we have more productive capacity at home and encouraging us to consume more of what we produce locally. Now, when I say locally, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm speaking about only Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica. I would love to, when I say locally, I'm speaking regionally.
Yes.
And that's where I think now if we could move towards some type of a regional currency that is also fairly well floating and ensuring that we are producing more regionally and at home, and therefore producing the type of jobs and employment that we need, in order to ensure that everyone maximizes their earning potential, then the type of monetary policy that's required for that is one that is sort of allowing the exchange rate to shift as to allow us to maintain our competitive advantages at home, so that we produce more and we consume more at home, therefore giving our people more productive employment. And when you have productive employment, wages automatically increase. Everyone can take care of themselves, and I don't have the need for a government to subsidize my consumption. Which then really we're now subsidizing foreign consumption, if you think about it, when governments are spending a lot of transfers and subsidies. We need to cut that out. But if you think about it, there's also the feedback loop of the politics that we spoke about earlier. If I know that I have to spend money as a government to support you, I have a lot of power in this matrix. And I think we also need to break that. So I would say now I'm really for us having our own currencies, but those currencies need to have exchange rates with world currencies that encourage us to produce more and to consume more at home.
Okay, so Justin, you are this incredible Caribbean economist, now Carnival businessman, right?
Yes.
How do you see Carnival as a homegrown product? It's a media product, it's a physical product, it's an event, it's really authentic and indigenous to the Caribbean and as local as it can possibly get. How do you see Carnival like as a beacon of leadership for your policies that you have spoken about in terms of changing the system?
Well, I have to say that it has been my involvement, and I can say the name Spirit Mass in Trinidad, that has really opened my mind to what we have got wrong and where we need to go. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, this Carnival band is an events company. It is a digital platform. It is a marketing company. It is also a manufacturing company, yes, and a distribution company, all wrapped up in one. Trying to manage that, I have tried to wrap my mind around that and realize, oh my gosh, this is really something that has come out of our indigenous, our from our people. And so here again, I think sometimes what has come out from us indigenously, we have sort of not given that type of industry the type of respect that it deserves. Because I can say to you that out of this investment, we now have close to 30 full-time employees. This is something that just started up in 2023. Yeah, 30 full-time employees.
Wow, congratulations.
And at Carnival time, we employ maybe close to 1,000 people.
Wow.
Yes. So could you imagine why is that? We could be employing many more people on a year-round basis if I was manufacturing more of that at home.
Yeah.
But because of comparative advantage, it makes more. It's easier. This is a tough thing for me. It's easier for me to go to China to get some of that produced. That shouldn't be. I really want our policymakers to understand that if you want the employment associated with our indigenous culture, let's make it easier for me to do that and perhaps make it more difficult for me to import it. Yes?
Yeah, I think, Justin, it also has to come from the people as well. I would love to, I used to play mass all the time. The next time I play mass, if you tell me this costume is made in Trinidad, I would pay more money for a costume that I know is made in Trinidad by Trinidadian seamstresses and artisans than, mass produced in some factory in China that has no soul. Somebody said to me, I've seen these kinds of things online and it's so much cheaper. I'm like, yeah, but a lady sat down here in Vanuatu and cut this fabric and sewed it, and I'm going to buy for $70 US this dress. And I feel like more and more we're becoming, the next generation, certainly my children's generation, are more and more socially conscious, environmentally conscious, sustainability conscious, and would prefer to support businesses that are local, that are authentic, that are supporting local industry than the soulless, mass-produced. Certainly, I feel like there's that direction happening already in the market. And so even irrespective of the policymakers doing nothing, I think people, the market is already speaking and supporting those kinds of interventions. Where I think governments need to help, or I shouldn't say help, where I think governments need to focus is improving the ease of doing business and the cost of doing business. When the majority of businesses in Trinidad and Tobago are spending anywhere up to 10% of their gross revenue on security, right? Then it makes it less advantageous to produce locally and to have this business. The governments need to set the playing field. They need to create the pitch for people like Justin to bowl or to bat, right? And that's what the governments need to do. They need to focus on getting the ease of doing business and things like security, things like cutting bureaucracy and red tape, digitizing processes like filing your paperwork for taxes and for licensing and so on. All of those things we talk about in Barbados, CAIPO. Oh my God, the biggest headache on this planet, right? I'm sorry. You could edit that out if you need to, Lily. I mean, how you expect businesses to thrive when they have to pay somebody to sit down in a government office for the whole day to get a license, to get a notary, we are in effect paying taxes for a government to strangle us. And that's what needs to change the government. And Jamaica's done a good job of streamlining and making ease of doing business, but that's what needs to change as well, the ease of doing business and the cost of doing business and the security.
May I also add to that collaborations. So if I want to set up my factory in Barbados or Trinidad, and China has they know how to do this. We could also invite them to collaborate with us here, because I think that's going to be important. How we get that technology transfer, that knowledge transfer from those countries. Those collaborations are also something that our governments need to encourage, because I think it would be so much easier for me to do if I was to collaborate, let's say, with the Chinese factory. Say, okay, come, let's set up in Barbados or Trinidad and let's work together so that we can have, I'm not saying we have to have 100% of the value added here, but at least we could have 50% of the value added here. Yeah. Because I want to create more jobs here. Come and help me do that. Collaborate with me, rather than me shifting almost 80% of the value added abroad and my people are not really benefiting from it. But I think that's the mindset that we have to change. We can have the joint ventures. We can encourage that investment. But hey, I need to ensure that the conditions of my people are improving. And however we do that, governments have to set the pitch and do these things. But governments also have to help us collaborate easily. And to say to our neighbors around this world, you really want to help us develop, but I need to create jobs at home, and please help me do that. That's the type of assistance that we need now. So, yeah.
Super powerful. This is a super powerful discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marla. Thank you, Justin. I think we covered a lot of ground, even though, I mean, there's certainly more ground to cover. But, improving the human condition here, actively, having that as a starting point for any decision that we make is certainly a very powerful lens to look at everything.
Thank you, Lily.
Thanks for having me, Lily. Appreciate it.
This episode of the Upwind Podcast is brought to you by Acti Advisors, a full-stack advisory platform for founders. We work side by side with entrepreneurs as embedded partners, guiding strategy, growth, and execution. From business development and client acquisition to finance and fundraising, we help founders remove barriers and scale faster, while connecting them to capital and world-class relationships. Acti Advisors, side by side with founders every step of the way. Learn more at actiadvisors.com.